If things sound a little different today, that's because I'm recording this from our Airbnb in Alaska after what was already a pretty eventful trip. My husband and I flew here yesterday from Philadelphia. We didn't even land until about 9:30 at night, and by the time we got our bags, got settled into the hotel, finally got to bed, it was around 11 p.m., 11:30. And then our alarms went off at 4:30 a.m. So yes, we might be a little bit crazy. And with roughly 5.5 hours of sleep, we decided it was the perfect day to hike 9.5 miles with about 3,500 feet of elevation gain. Honestly, though, we looked at the forecast and saw rain for most of the week ahead and thought if today is the day, then today is the day. And also, I'll add that the hike was 4-hour drive from our hotel. Plus, we scheduled to get to the hike, you had to take a 30-minute sea taxi, which is like a little boat. And then they take you to the shore, and then you like walk up the beach, and then you do the hike. So then you have to do all of that reversed. So yeah, it was a big adventure. And sometimes you don't wait until everything is perfect. Sometimes you have to just do it and not overthink it. And I think that applies to a lot more than just hiking. And one of my favorite things that I've learned within the last few years is you can actually rent bear spray. And we got ours here at a 24-hour coffee drive-through. So the Pacific Northwest is really into drive-through coffee shops, which is kind of cute. And they're everywhere here. And I noticed them a lot in Seattle area when I used to go there a lot for work when I worked for the Navy. So that was kind of cool. But only in Alaska could you pull up for a morning latte, which is 24 hours, which is kind of cool, and then leave prepared for a bear encounter. So yeah, only in Alaska. And a few years ago, I had no idea what bear spray was. And then we went to the Tetons and Yellowstone, I learned. And at first I pictured something like bug spray. Like you'd spray a little on your jacket, maybe, your socks or pants, and then you're off into the woods. That is not how bear spray works, though. Bear spray is actually like pepper spray with just a little more enthusiasm. And you carry it. Hopefully you never use it. Here's the part where I thought was pretty cool, and especially me, someone who likes to prepare. You can actually practice bear spray. It's like they have like a dedicated bear spray practice spray, and it looks like the real thing, but it's made so you can safely learn it before you use it on your trip. Which makes a lot of sense because the first time you figure out how to use bear spray probably shouldn't be when a bear is charging at you. So we practiced with one at home before flying out just a couple days ago. And you can't bring bear spray on a plane. So yeah, it's similar. It has like similar oomph to a fire extinguisher. Anyway, hopefully none of this information becomes useful to me this week or really any time. So yeah, that's where I'm at right now. I'm recording surrounded by wildlife. I'm recording in our Airbnb bedroom right now in this like cabin. And I'm hoping to see wildlife from a very respectful distance. And somehow being here reminded me of another time in my life when I found myself in an environment that felt a little bit hostile. Except instead of bears, it was my first engineering internship. Welcome back to the podcast. She's been through some engineering shit with your host, Christine, where we keep unlearning all of the outdated career and life advice we never asked for, but somehow managed to absorb anyway. This podcast is about the messy lessons, unforgettable realizations, workplace chaos, career pivots, and life experiences that teach us more than any textbook in engineering school ever could. So grab your coffee, your emotional support beverage of choice, and let's get into today's story. I was 19 years old, and almost every lunch break, I would lock myself into a bathroom stall and cry. Not because engineering was too hard. It was because the people were. When I called my parents and begged them, please, for the love of God, can you let me get the frick out of this place? They said no. On my very first day, my boss's assistant, Trish, pulled me aside and told me something that I have never forgotten. And Trish was my fairy godmother that summer. She said, Gary didn't want to hire you. He wanted a man. He doesn't think you're going to amount to anything this summer. So welcome to the company. And the really surprising part was that at the end of the internship, Gary said, "You were the best intern I ever had." I said, I know. Because when you tell me I can't do something, you better watch out. Because any gusto I already had, which was really high, you just multiply that when someone tells me I can't do something. So today I'm going to tell you everything that happened between those two moments. Because this wasn't just a bad internship. It completely changed how I thought about careers, leadership, confidence, and the kind of people we should never allow to define our worth. And if you've ever walked into a workplace and thought, is it me or is this place actually insane? You're in the right place. The office itself was tiny. The kind of office where everyone knew who brought leftovers for lunch, who reheated fish in the microwave, all that kind of stuff. We all were breathing the same air. There was nowhere to hide. There was 25 employees, if that. Very, very small company. And everybody knew everybody's business. The cast of characters was interesting. One couple worked there together and brought their poodles into the office every single day. And honestly, the poodles may have been the most emotionally stable members of the company. There was one of my coworkers. I was 19. He asked me out. He was 30. I had been a legal adult for what felt like approximately 7 minutes, and this man somehow thought it was a perfectly reasonable situation to ask me out. I thought about it for a second, and then I said no. And then we continued working together because apparently that was considered normal. You just kind of act like things just didn't happen when they're extremely uncomfortable. But none of these people were really the story. The story was Gary. Gary owned the company. Gary was a dinosaur that I swear, thawed out from the Big Bang just to yell at me and all the other women in the office. On my first day, his assistant, Trish, pulled me aside. And you know when someone says, I just want to give you a heads up, your brain goes, it knows this might not be so great. This is probably not going to be a good thing. She said, Gary didn't want to hire you. He wanted to hire a man. He has always hired a man. He doesn't think you're going to amount to anything. And I found out later that my professor really vouched for me. So thank you, Professor. I forget what his name was. Imagine hearing that before you've even figured out where the coffee machine is. Welcome aboard. The thing about Gary was that he wasn't subtle. He wasn't someone who made passive-aggressive comments that left you wondering whether you'd imagine them. No. If Gary had an opinion, you knew it. Usually loudly, usually in front of other people, and often directed toward the women in the office. At 19, I didn't know what to make of it. Part of me thought, maybe this is just what work is like. Maybe everyone deals with this. Maybe I just need to get used to it. And if you've ever been early in your career, you know exactly how dangerous that thought can be. Because when you're young, you don't just learn technical skills. You learn what behavior you think is normal. And what happened next taught me more about leadership than any class I've ever taken. But not because Gary was a good example, quite the opposite. Because pretty soon the bathroom became my safe space. I'm not someone who cries very easily, especially over a guy, especially over a career. And it actually makes me really mad. Almost every lunch break, I disappear into the bathroom, lock myself in there, and cry. Not loud, dramatic, movie scene crying. The quiet kind. The kind where I'm really mad. I'm pissed. The kind where you're trying to breathe without making a sound, because the last thing you want is for someone to walk in and realize that you're falling apart, that you can't handle it. And that's been a common theme of my career, is that I didn't want to seem like I couldn't handle it, that I couldn't handle the pressure, or that I couldn't handle the disrespect. I was more worried about being perceived as someone who couldn't handle it, when really no one should just be able to handle it. So I'd wipe my face, take a few breaths, look in the mirror, tell myself to get it together, and then walk back out like everything was completely fine. I got pretty good at pretending that I was okay. The funny thing is, I don't even remember exactly what happened every single day. I just remember how it felt. I remember feeling constantly on edge, like I was always waiting for the next criticism, the next comment, the next time somehow I'd become the target or someone else would, and it would still be uncomfortable. And that feeling sticks with you a lot longer than the individual moments do. My dad actually drove me to work every morning that summer. Every day we pull into the parking lot, I would typically get there first, and I would wait because the office hadn't even been open. And without fail, Gary would end up getting out of his car around the same time. My dad took one look at him and decided almost immediately that he didn't like him. Now, my dad is a very kind person, and he's also extremely protective. And every morning he'd look over at Gary and say something along the lines of, "If that guy ever lays a hand on you, I am going in there." Now, to be clear, Gary never did anything physical, but my dad had already decided he wasn't impressed, and he was ready to commit a crime, felony, for me, which wouldn't be the first time. Looking back, parents have an incredibly keen ability to read people. Sometimes they see things we're too young to recognize ourselves. I wanted to quit so badly, and I would tell them every day how awful it was. And every time they gave me the exact same answer. "Nope, you can't do that." That was the entire conversation. "Nope, you can't do that." No long speech, not a motivational quote, no sympathy, no empathy, just no. You're not able to do that. At the time, I thought they were being so unbelievably unfair. I remember thinking, you're not the ones dealing with this every single day. Why won't you just let me quit? Years later, I asked them about it. My parents told me they knew I was safe, and they knew the internship had an end date. They believed learning how to work with difficult people would end up helping me for the rest of my career. Personally, I didn't appreciate that answer at 19, although I appreciate it now. Because here's what that internship taught me. It taught me that just because someone has authority doesn't automatically make them a good leader. And quite frankly, I have some issues with authority figures, mostly male authority figures. And maybe most importantly, it taught me exactly what kind of manager I never wanted to become. Sometimes the worst examples end up teaching you the best lessons. I just wish they were a little less miserable. But if you think crying in a bathroom was the worst part of this internship, it wasn't. Because eventually Gary and I disagreed about something that should have been incredibly simple: Microsoft Excel. And somehow Excel became the hill he was willing to die on. One day, I was walking Gary through a project I'd been working on. I had put together graphs, trends, analysis. I knew the numbers. I understood what I was presenting. I had done the work. As I'm explaining everything, Gary stops me. He looks at my screen and says, "That's wrong." I looked back at him and said, I don't think so. Then I explained why. He wasn't convinced. He repeated himself. "No, that's not how Excel works," he said. Now here's the thing. I've always been pretty comfortable with Excel. Even back then, I had been using it for years. So I walked him through exactly what I had done again. He still insisted that I was wrong. At this point, neither of us was moving. And then he completely lost his patience in front of the entire office. He threw his hands up and announced, "She is so annoying. I am not talking to her anymore." And this was loud, very loud, and very much like an adult tantrum. It made me want to crawl under my desk, click my fingers, and just become invisible. He screamed, "I'm not talking to her today. Christine just doesn't exist. I'm not talking to her." And he did it the next day and the next day. That was his solution. Not trying to understand, not checking if maybe he was mistaken. I remember standing there thinking, did this really just happen? And the craziest part was nobody seemed surprised, which told me everything that I needed to know. This wasn't just unusual. This was Gary. I wish I could tell you I had some brilliant clapback, some real zinger. I didn't. I just sat there. Because when you're 19 and your boss is having what only can be described as a public temper tantrum, your brain isn't exactly firing on all cylinders. You're just thinking, please let this end and let me pretend and move the frick on as if it didn't even happen. Just sweep it under the rug. The older I get, the more I realize that people who are secure with themselves don't need to embarrass other people. They don't need to win every disagreement. The people who do that are often protecting something, usually their very fragile ego. But at 19, I couldn't have explained that, and I shouldn't have been able to. I just knew it felt awkward, and I wanted to be invisible. And I remember thinking, if this is what being an engineer is like, I don't think I want to do this. But thankfully, engineering wasn't the problem. Gary was. But somehow, the weirdest interaction of the summer still hadn't happened yet. Because near the end of my internship, Gary invited all of us on what he thought would be an unforgettable outing. Let's just say we remembered it for very different reasons. As the internship was winding down, Gary announced that he had planned something special. He was taking a few of us on a tour of a friend's car garage. Now, if you're a car person, this probably sounds amazing. But I wasn't really much of a car person at that time. I'm sure there were beautiful cars. There were motorcycles, engines, parts, tools, the kind of place where people could spend hours talking about horsepower and know exactly what everyone else was talking about, the car lingo. But at that time, I was not one of those people. I appreciated the craftsmanship, but I wasn't exactly standing there thinking, this is the greatest day of my life. Gary, however, seemed to expect that reaction. He was genuinely excited to show us around, and I think he assumed everyone would be just as fascinated as he was. On the drive back, he looked over at me and said, "You didn't seem very grateful." I remember thinking, grateful? But for what exactly? You spent an entire summer telling me I wasn't good enough. You publicly embarrassed me. You questioned everything that I did. And now I'm supposed to act like you've done some incredible favor just because we toured some garage? I wasn't rude. I wasn't disrespectful. I wasn't just pretending to be enthusiastic about something I had never asked to do. And honestly, I think that's another lesson. Being professional doesn't mean performing gratitude for people who haven't treated you professionally. Oh, and remember that coworker who asked me out? He was on that trip too. And after I turned him down earlier that summer, he basically pretended that I didn't exist, which honestly worked out just fine for me. It made for a very quiet afternoon. The entire internship felt less like a workplace and more like a reality TV show that somehow forgot to hire HR. At 19, I kept thinking, there is absolutely no way every engineering office is like this. At least I hope not. And fortunately, I was right. But then my last day arrived. Finally, I would be free. And after everything that had happened, Gary said something I never saw coming. At the end of the internship, Gary called me into his office. And for a split second, I remember thinking, here we go. One last outburst, one last lecture. Instead, he looked at me and said, "You are the best intern I've ever had." I honestly didn't know how to respond. I think I just stood there. Because this was the same man who, before I even started, had told people he didn't want to hire me because I wasn't a man. The same man who argued with me over Excel. The same man who made me cry in a bathroom more times than I can count. And now I suddenly was the best intern he'd ever had. It was one of the strangest moments of my small career. Not because I needed his approval, but because it reminded me of something I've seen over and over again since then. Sometimes people decide who you are before they've even met you. They create a story about you in their head. Maybe you're too young, too quiet, too inexperienced, too much of something, or not enough of something else. And then reality slowly forces them to rewrite that story. And honestly, I've done that. I have bias of people. We all do. Gary had already decided who I was before I walked through the door. The only thing that I could control was showing up every day and doing the work. Eventually, he couldn't ignore it. Looking back now, I don't think at all his final comment erased everything that had happened. It didn't suddenly make the internship rosy and sunshine and rainbows. It didn't undo the tears that I shed. It didn't undo the anxiety, the uncomfortableness. It didn't magically transform him into this amazing manager. It did teach me something important, though. Other people's first impressions are not your destiny, and neither are their biases. I actually think about that internship more often than I did in my 20s. Not because I miss it. Definitely not because I miss it. But because it gave me the framework for the rest of my career. And it ignited a fire that had already been slowly burning in me. Ironically, one of the most terrible bosses I've ever had helped shape the kind of leader I wanted to become. I've managed teams, I've led projects, I've worked with people across all levels of an organization. And the one thing I've always tried to remember is this, and this isn't some revolutionary thought. This isn't original. This is something that people have been saying for many years. It's just when you experience it, it really starts to make sense. People don't forget how you make them feel. They will remember that. They always will remember how you make them feel. They won't remember all the words or the specific details of some situation or interaction, but they will make you remember how they made you feel. I remember exactly how I felt walking into that office every morning. Leadership isn't only about getting results. It's about creating an environment where people can actually do their best work. And you want to create that environment where people can be the best version of themselves and reach their full potential. And if you're listening to this because you're early in your career, especially if you're a woman in engineering or another male-dominated field, I want you to hear this. One bad manager does not get to decide whether you belong. One toxic workplace does not define your future. Don't confuse a bad environment with your own ability. These are all really hard things. And I've been there much longer, many years later after this internship. I've had these experiences of getting confused between my abilities and a bad environment. So this internship was just the beginning of a wild ride. But it did teach me to not give up on myself and to really not let anyone define me. And of course, I sometimes think, well, anyone can say wild things to me, but I'm the one who says the most wildest stuff about myself and is the most critical. And yet it's something, these are all lessons that I'm still actively working on, and it's always going to be a journey. There's not some destination. I think I'm just able to recognize them and manage them a little more healthy in a much healthier way than I have in the past. So if you've ever worked with someone who made you question your own abilities, or if you've had a workplace experience that was so unbelievable, people wouldn't believe it unless they saw it themselves, I want to hear about it. Leave a comment below. Seriously, I read them. Or if you want to tell the whole story, ask for advice, share a win or a loss, or you just want to rant, because I get it, call the STEM hotline, which is 267-281-3633. One more time, that is 267-281-3633, where you can call and you can also text. So feel free to do either of them. Some of my favorite episodes are going to come from stories, and with your permission, I'd love to feature some of them on future episodes. I'm also starting to schedule out guests in the next month or so. I have many close friends and former colleagues and acquaintances that I have heard, we talk all the time about our work experiences, and I want to have them on the podcast because I think having different perspectives than just mine, that's what makes everyone so unique, is your own story that is unique and personal to you. And I think I have learned so much by listening to other people's stories, through books, through talking to friends and strangers even. And I truly think we all have something to say. So I want this podcast to have multiple perspectives so people can learn from each other and, not just be me giving out advice all the time. because I don't have all the answers. I'm figuring out a lot of things on the fly. And if you're new here, first of all, welcome. I'm really glad you found this little quarter of the internet. I just want to thank all the people. If you're still listening, you are amazing. Thank you. And I think I have 16 subscribers right now. So thank you guys so much. I also have a YouTube channel, so feel free to subscribe to that. It's the same title as the podcast, and I'll put all the links in the show notes. And feel free to subscribe and follow this on Spotify. All of the episodes are also, they're on, like I said, they're on Spotify, and they're also on YouTube. YouTube, I also upload a lot of different, I do the long form podcast, but then I also do YouTube shorts. I'm on Instagram as well, so I'll leave all that below, all the links. But yeah, I share a little bit more about like my day-to-day life on those platforms, like my dog, and I'm a equestrian, so I have photos and vlogs around the barn, so you can kind of see a taste of my non-engineering life. And I also talk about like being in an MBA program, so I'm getting my part-time MBA right now, so you'll see some like vlogs and travel stuff. So yeah, feel free to check that out. If any of that sounds like your kind of content, I'd love to have you stick around. Next week, I'm sharing another story that isn't quite engineering related, but there was a bit of crossover where I mustered up the courage to end an engagement back in 2009. My long-term relationship. All right, so that's today's episode. Catch you on the next one, where we keep unlearning all the outdated career and life advice we never asked for, but somehow absorbed anyway.